Hi, everybody. David Nour, back with you with my business partner and head of our RevOps practice, Jenn Cordz. Hello, Jenn.
Hi, Nour. How are you this morning?
I'm great, thanks. Nice to see you. For our audience, this is our Rev Up Live. We do these every Tuesday at 11 o'clock Eastern on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, as well as Rev Up is also a podcast. This is episode 13. In our work, and we're going to show you a couple examples in a second. We're having a lot of great conversations with chief revenue officers, chief marketing officers around recurring revenue models, around SaaS, if you will, software as a service business models. And in particular, we've kind of packaged this idea of a customer lifecycle journey. And we're spending a lot of time in really evaluating the maturity of different organizations around this. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And Jenn and I want to touch up on a process that we've captured called an accelerated time to close, ATC, and specifically your processes, your capabilities, your tech stack in that maturity. But it's really important. I've always believed in what I call the elevator ride, right? Is it, the construct, some sort of application? How does this apply? Some sort of implementation, which is how is this relevant to me and relevant to my world? So if you think about, and this is again, our customer lifecycle journey maturity model, we're up to, I want to say 82 different executive conversations around this. So if you start with a digital on-ramp, they have to somehow learn about you. You create awareness where you really are engaging them in really understanding their buying intent, really understanding kind of where they're coming from, what the challenges are, where and how you may fit in their ecosystem, and really their strategic priorities very early in the process. As you move on to engagement, you're really furthering the credibility, the empathy. You're really looking for a viable fit between their challenges and their priorities and that which they're willing to invest mind share and wallet share into with kind of the solution you bring. Sometimes as a product on ramp, think of the freemium model where, hey, I can sign up for this. I don't need to kind of connect with you. I can test it myself. But at some point, you're going to embrace and engage them in evaluation, which is really phase 3, ultimately leading to a purchase. And I've been at this for a while. I coach a lot of clients. But when they buy, that's really where the relationship starts. When they say, yep, we believe in the value that we believe, you can add, we're willing to commit to this. And it's not just the initial cost, as many of you know, it really is, it goes into the right, now the relationship really starts because you're going to embark on the right-hand side of this, this figure eight, and, the adoption, the time, effort, bandwidth, resources, priorities to really implement, deploy, train, develop, integrate into the rest of their ecosystem. Only when you do 5 successfully, they may add a deployment on ramp where they want more licenses or they want more of what you bring. All that should lead to really impact, which is on the left-hand side, you're promised a whole lot of value. On the right-hand side, that's where that value is delivered. And only when the receiver, the consumer of that value believes that they've received that value, that's when that impact is realized. And only when you create that impact, you'll build evangelists out of those clients. I was up in New York with a client last week, and part of a sales gathering, we had a couple of customers and a couple of different channel partners present why they've picked this particular client and how they chose them and how they were able to justify the investment. And think about it a second. For clients and channel partners to take the time out of their busy schedule to come and present to a group of internal folks about that experience, that's quintessentially that evangelist kind of DNA. And for them to now talk to or be willing to talk to other customers, that's also an opportunity to really share their insights and perspectives. When they're evangelizing you, they really build a deeper, more meaningful relationship with you. Jenn, let me pause your comments on this maturity model.
Well, we've seen it resonate across a lot of our clients, and I know you've been having a lot of conversations with executives and our clients and doing research related to this customer maturity model. So what sort of responses have you been getting related to this?
Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm fascinated that nobody's pushed back and said, nope, this is wrong, right? This is completely off base. I don't know what you're thinking, but this is not true. And yeah, they may call it different things, but the fascinating part is they genuinely believe these 7 steps is what it takes in today's market to separate yourself from the noise. And make no mistake about it, you and I have seen there's a lot of noise in inevitably every market, right? And by the way, they all start to look and act and sound exactly the same. So how do you elevate yourself above the noise? How do you align the way they buy to the way you sell? As you and I were on a call with a client executive last week, the whole adoption and usage, so the customer success becomes incredibly valuable in that process. And by the way, and you've heard me use this analogy, if you think of a relay race, it is won or lost with the passing of that baton. Mm-hmm. And if marketing, sales, channel partners, customer success, the product team, engineering, R&D, they don't figure out how to get around clients around this track in a smooth, seamless manner, that's when you have possibilities of that baton dropping. And that's when you kind of miss the opportunity. And you get one chance to do a POC, or as a client recently talked about it, and I really like it, proof of value, right? Not a concept of the value, really focusing on outcomes, not output. So every executive we've spoken with likes it, agrees with it. They might call it different things, but they believe in this kind of infinity loop. It's won or lost with passing of the baton. And here's the other one you and I uncovered. Seldom is any of the organizations we've spoken to perfect in every one of these. I love a comment, and you and I've had this conversation with them of, where are you really strong? And this would be a really good time for leaders and their teams to do some introspection. Where are you really strong? Where are the growing edges? Where are the upside? Where are you? Doesn't have to be broken, but where is it not clicking that we need to focus on?
Well, and it's really interesting when we have that conversation with our clients that even people from different teams identify the same weaknesses and the same strengths without necessarily having a conversation with each other to decide where you're strong versus where you're weak. They just introspectively know it. And
it shows, right, in your dashboards. It shows in your deal flows. It shows in your retention rates and in your customer churn. I mean, again, if inevitably what you and I, when we go and talk to clients and we look at their landscape, we look at their environment, we do our baseline assessment, you start to peel back the onion, you see where some of these things are falling apart. You see where there's no seamless handoff between sales and customer success, or marketing is not really involved on the right-hand side of this equation. And as such, there's less of an opportunity for upsell, cross-sell opportunities, right? With that existing client base who knows you, likes you, trusts you. Right. So this model works when it's understood, embraced, adopted, and executed against in world-class recurring revenue model organizations. So I want to build on that. I want you, if you could, for our audience, can you, this accelerated time to close is really something you and your team have come up with that overlays really nicely with the left-hand side of that maturity model. Tell the audience just high level about these 5 steps and why you believe this is such an impactful process.
Sure. So the accelerated time to close process is a 5-step building blocks, if you will, methodology that my team goes through with every new engagement. And it starts out with getting the foundation. It's really the baseline audit. And it's understanding what tools are we working with, how are they connected, what databases databases exist, what data is flowing and from where. And so understanding that baseline and that foundation really helps you then strengthen it and then build upon it. And so after you've done the audit, we move into the next phase, which is actually looking at buyers' personas, needs, behaviors. What are the things that we're wanting the people who come to our website or come to any of our assets and engage with them? What are we wanting them to do? Where are we wanting them to go? Are we targeting the right people in our messaging? And so all of those things are part of phase 2. When we look at, are the people we're attracting actually the people that sales wants to talk to? And so it's, again, digging through a lot of data and aligning both sales and marketing to ensure that marketing is attracting who sales wants to talk to. And so then after that, we move into phase 3, and we actually dig into the user journey. What are the key behaviors on the website or within the buying motion that we want to identify and streamline, moving that person from high level interest into a buying conversation? And so we make sure that there's collateral, there's persona tagging, and making sure that the systems are pushing the information to sales so they can follow up in a personalized manner. And then moving on to the 4th phase is the improve and optimize. No operation system, strategy, tool can ever be a set it and forget it. Businesses grow and evolve on a daily, if not weekly basis. And you need to modify how you're doing business, how you're engaging with customers and prospects and meeting them where they want to engage with you. The demand gen function is kind of a misnomer. You're not creating demand, you're intercepting that demand. And so looking at ways to improve and optimize how we are attracting people, how we're tracking people, how we do that baton pass from sales to marketing or marketing to sales and sales to customer success, really looking at ways to remove a lot of that friction in that process is what stage 4 is looking to do. And then in stage 5, we look at ways to amplify everything that we are doing. Maybe we need to add a new technology that we didn't have before. Maybe we're scaling because we're adding new headcount. And so we really look at the feedback loop that we've created in this whole process of what's working, what's not working, how can we adjust, what should we be doubling down on, and really growing what every organization is doing to drive that top line revenue.
Those are great. And again, for our audience, this is our accelerated time to close. It's a process that Jenn and her team have built, and we've now executed this at several clients. Jenn, this episode, we're talking specifically about really phase 4. And for our audience, if you haven't had a chance to kind of listen, watch to the previous 3, we covered baseline audit, we covered buyer profiles, needs and behaviors, we covered user journey. In this phase 4, improve and optimize, tell us more about what happens in that phase and why is that so critical to success of revenue operations?
The improve and optimize phase is really where the rubber meets the road and where the first 3 phases really start to get traction, and you can see that impact across the organization. So why it's so critical, that's when you're getting data back from sales who are having the conversations with the people that marketing is attracting. It's when you're seeing the data flows and the dashboards that you've created. Are they populating with data that's trustworthy? Are you getting insights from any of that data? And then ultimately making the fine adjustments to the processes to make them work more efficiently is what we're also doing in this phase, because creating unnecessary manual work is not part of any operations team's responsibility. We're trying to remove that friction, and when we can operate in the background and no one notices what we're doing, is really when you know that a tech stack and a system structure and an architecture has been well created and well integrated. Mm-hmm. So this phase is really critical, and it's where you see the most traction as we've moved through this phase. The first few phases are really more about the data and the foundation and setting it up to move correctly. So, Nour, I know you've also talked to some of our clients about the accelerated time to close process. What sort of challenges have they brought up, and what have you observed with understanding the opportunities in phase 4?
So there's no shortage of things to do. And you and I have seen a lot of organizations, leaders, teams regrettably confuse busy work with productivity. Busy work with, I'm busy, I'm getting things done, I'm creating value, I'm having a material impact on the organization. What I've appreciated about our conversation in the past on this is, if you think about that idea of maturity, if you think about that idea of world class, no world class leader or organization ever stops learning and growing. And you've heard me say this, there's a fundamental difference between confidence that says, I know a lot, but there's still a lot I can learn, and arrogance that says, I know a lot, but there's nothing new I can learn. And you and I see it when we walk in, and either A, we're already doing all that, or B, we don't have that problem, or C, yeah, we did that 20 years ago. And you just you're polite, and you're kind of, you want to take the high road, and then you look at their dashboards, or you ask questions they don't have answers to, or if you get a chance to see a report or sit in a meeting and it comes up and they don't have answers to certain things that should be foundational, you realize that phase 4 is not happening. Good people always, and I learned this, it's amazing how often the teacher becomes the student. I learned this from a client, always assume good intent. So good people, good intentions, they set it up 3 years ago. They set it up, with or somebody else set it up, and somebody else has taken over. And they've never gone back and look at, what do we need to enhance? What do we need to evaluate? What do we need to amplify? And conversely, what do we need to eliminate? What is no longer relevant? What is no longer required? I love, I think you did an audit of, some 600 leads for a client that had never been touched.
Yeah.
And that executive was trying to compose himself on the call, but he was livid. Like, when we're desperately looking for customers and revenue, that's a missed opportunity. And those prospects didn't raise their hand and say, I want to see a demo, or can you share information with me, or contact me, because they were bored. They were actively looking for a solution. And when they're looking and you don't respond, they're going to go somewhere else.
Well, so there's that industry stat that if you don't follow up with a prospect within 5 minutes, no more than 2 hours, like, they're getting cold, dying on the vine every second that goes by.
And I think, what did you say? That, that it took somebody 3 weeks to get back to somebody who was looking for a demo.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what? Consumers, B2B, B2C, doesn't matter. We always have options. And we're always going to look for options if we're not satisfied, if we're not happy with the response, the interaction, the results we get. So, and again, this isn't about throwing stone. Nobody's perfect. We're all learning and growing. But I see phase 4 come front and center when there's either an arrogant leader that says, we know it all, we've got this covered, or you sit in a meeting, sit in a conversation, and it's just so apparent that they've got so much going on that nobody's going back and looking at opportunities to improve and optimize, which begs the question. And this is one of my favorite questions of you, right? 3 best practices you've seen great companies implement in that phase. What are they doing when it comes to improving? What are they doing in terms of optimizing that really stood out for you?
To quickly comment on something that you mentioned earlier, when people inherit other systems, or someone else has set it up and they're now running it, one of the biggest things, and I can cover this in Pitfalls too in more depth if you'd like, but is lack of documentation on how systems are set up. But that's also one of the best practices that every organization really should focus on, is ensuring that your systems and the way things work and what's connected and expected behaviors are all documented. Because at the end of the day, that is record of truth. That is how you know what's working and what's not. And so if you have it documented, then anybody can go into the system. Anyone on an operations team or external can go into the system and understand what it should be doing. And if it's not doing that, then they can help fix it. So documentation is both a best practice as well as a big pitfall, because it has to be done intentionally. It is usually the last thing everybody thinks about, but really making sure that your systems and your expected behaviors are documented are absolutely key. One of the other things that I've seen world-class organizations do is make sure that they're aligning their KPIs with their dashboards. And so to make sure that what they're reporting on and what they're tracking actually is driving impact, and it's the metrics that matter to the leaders, not the vanity metrics or the high level conversion metrics. Like actually digging in and understanding, okay, this converts to that and that converts to this, and understanding the why behind all of it. And then the last thing that world-class organizations do really well is have that feedback loop, have that open communication between sales, marketing, customer success on what is working, what is not working, why isn't it working, creating closed lost reasons or unqualified reasons. Really gives the marketing team and the operations team specifically a lot of good nuggets to then understand what fine tuning needs to be done to pass the correct leads, to get sales into the right conversations versus passing them things that they're wasting their time doing. And so those would probably be the three best practices that I would focus on for any organization at first. And if you don't have any one of those, I would definitely take time to create those processes within your own organization. So, Nour, why do you believe the reflection and course correction? Like, I mean, I've talked about the feedback loop several times, but like, why do you believe the reflection and course correction is so critical to sales and marketing executives?
I want to answer that by asking the audience to think about if they've ever played a dynamic sport like soccer or hockey or lacrosse, where, you know, there's no timeouts and it's constantly moving. If your kids play, if you ever watch one of those games, the best players and the best teams are constantly scanning the field or the hockey rink, or, you know, the pitch for what's happening. And that's a really good analogy for thinking about your market. No question, a series of practices, when delivered consistently, often creates predictable outcomes. What you're never sure of is at what cost. What you're never sure of is the efficiency, the effectiveness, the miles per gallon of that effort, right? So if I gun my, accelerator and I get there, sure, I get there faster, but I burn, full tank of gas to do that where it wasn't really necessary. So we don't believe in growth at any cost. We believe in profitable growth. We believe in intelligent growth. We believe in disciplined growth. And if you're not making time to reflect, and listen, we're all busy. And you and I hear people say all the time, no, I'm busy. I'm sorry. I'm busy. I'm busy, right? If you're not making the time to reflect, to analyze the dashboard, the data that Jenn and her team just talked about that you create, to really understand not just what's happening, but why it's happening, how will you ever course correct? And if you don't course correct, I'm reminded of an analogy of a mentor drove into me. A 1 degree off at a rocket launch becomes miles off course when you start to get in the atmosphere. It's the exact same thing with your best intentions, your sales strategy, your marketing strategy, your growth strategy. 1% off at launch becomes miles off course when you start to get an atmosphere. So if you're not making course correction, how do you expect to be as efficient, effective, and world-class as you possibly could be? So that's why, Jenn, I'm a huge believer of making time for reflection, making time for course correction. So flipping it back over to you, for our audience, if you just joined us, you're listening to Jenn Cordz. Jenn and her whole team lead our revenue operations practice focused on processes, on capabilities, and on tech stack. And they've built this, what you're looking at, the accelerated time to close process that maps really nicely to this customer lifecycle maturity model that we showed earlier. And we're talking about this phase 4 of really improving and optimizing what you're doing, how you're doing it. Jenn, a couple minutes ago, you talked about, documentation. You talked about aligning KPIs with dashboard. You talked about consistent and candid feedback loop mechanism as some of the best practices. Talk about the pitfalls. Talk about, you've been at this now for a number of years. You worked with a number of clients. What are the common pitfalls, and why isn't that improving and optimizing either doesn't get done or doesn't get done as well as it can? What are the pitfalls you run into?
Yeah, the pitfalls are numerous, unfortunately, in this area specifically. The top 3 pitfalls that I see on a regular basis in all organizations, big or small, is lack of intentional retrospectives. They do a lot of things. To quote something you said earlier, the outcomes and the outputs, like they're doing a whole bunch of stuff, but they're not actually seeing what it actually creates. And so not giving themselves proper retrospectives, proper analysis, they just keep doing a whole bunch of stuff, thinking that it's making traction and they're getting somewhere when they may really just be treading water, is probably one of the biggest pitfalls that I see regularly. Ops teams are underwater, putting out fires every single day, moving from one thing to the next, never really having time to dig into any one thing. So that's first. Second would be lack of documentation related to their processes and capabilities and their tech stack. I know I said that's one of the best practices, but I also mentioned that it's one of the biggest pitfalls. Documentation has to be intentional. You have to make it a point within your internal processes, part of your culture, to make sure that you have what you're doing and how you're doing it documented. And then the last thing I would say is trying to track everything, not creating actual goals for what they're trying to get done. And so they're doing campaigns and they're trying to just drive a whole bunch of awareness or traffic to the website. But then what? Where are they supposed to go? What are they supposed to be doing? So lack of definition on what it is you're actually doing is one of the other big pitfalls, because if you're tracking everything, you're really tracking nothing. And so making sure that you have parameters for each thing that you're doing. Yes, it takes time and it front loads a lot of that work, but in the end, it'll actually make everybody's lives a little bit easier.
I just talked to a group of leaders that I captured in my notes when you talk about when you track everything, you're tracking nothing. I'm starting to see this trend, and I'm writing an article for Forbes about it. It's amazing how many organizations are equating pandemic growth with forever growth.
Yeah.
So during the pandemic, certain trends led to, you and I both ride power sports industry, right? They sold a whole bunch of units. People sold RVs, people sold boats, people sold, guess what? A lot of those industries are now getting normalized, right? Home pricing, right? Through the roof, because borrowing was really cheap. Now inflationary pressures have raised the interest rate. Guess what? Home sales are going to start to slow down. So don't confuse pandemic growth with forever growth. And it goes back to, are you measuring the right metrics? Do you understand why something is happening versus just what's happening? and not making flawed assumptions or assumptions based on flawed data because, we never cleaned it up, or we never got that information right, or we, are confusing, input with outcome or output with outcome. Those are all the things that lead to just completely missed points of why we're doing something.
Absolutely. And so I know you've talked to board members and investors, and you're hearing more and more that they're asking about optimization and what the company's doing to improve. What sort of feedback and things are they asking about, and what sort of recommendations are you making?
I was blessed to be around a couple of serial entrepreneurs recently who, Jen, you and I talked about this. When an entrepreneur creates $1 billion, now obviously fondly known as a unicorn, once, you could say, sure, they did well, but they were in the right place at the right time. When somebody does this 3, 4, 5 times, they've kind of figured out the formula. They've figured out the market product fit. They figured out where to focus. They figured out go raise plenty of capital to have that vision, surround yourself with great people to execute it. But they kind of understand that capital is not some bottomless pit that's just going to keep flowing. So whether you're raising outside capital or you're getting your projects funded within the organization, every astute investor is going to ask about use of funds. So whether I give you $100 or $100 million, what are you gonna do with that money? Where are you going to invest it? And where's the best return on that invested capital, on that invested time, effort, resources? Right? I talk a lot about return on impact. And there's no better validation that you know your business than when you highlight, here's how we've improved and optimized that piece of the business. We started with a set of assumptions. We started with a hypothesis. We went after the market with this product, this solution, this positioning, this packaging, this offering, this formula. Parts of it worked. Parts of it didn't. Parts that worked, we've amplified and we're doubling down on. Parts that didn't, we're pulling the plug on. Parts that didn't, we're cutting out of our messaging or our value proposition or our campaigns. That demonstrates a certain level of maturity that, again, astute investors are looking for. They're not looking for you to have all the answers. If you did, I would highly recommend the next flight to Las Vegas. They're not
lottery numbers.
Right. They're not expecting you to have a crystal ball. What they are expecting you to do is really have your finger and keep your finger on the pulse of the business to learn from every interaction, learn what works and what doesn't. And back to your comment about processes, capabilities, and tech stack, you should learn from every interaction and continuously make those improvements and optimizations. So bringing it back to your efforts, and you brought up the fact that you and your team go in and do a baseline assessment. What do you look for in any kind of improving or optimizing that's going on? What I don't know if I should ask at this point what surprises you or not, because you've seen a lot of different things. But what do you look for? What do you and your team are either impressed by or concerned by when you go in and see an organization work on improving, work on optimizing their efforts?
Very little surprises myself or my team at this point. But what we look for is, first we look for quick wins. So as we're doing our assessment, we set short, medium, and long-term goals based off of business priorities. And so that's one of the conversations with leadership to understand what it is they're doing and how quickly they want to do it. And so we do look at their tech stack and see what's connected, what's not, their database health, how much information do they have, what sort of information is required for sales to do their job, and are they is marketing providing that? Does the database have what sales actually needs, or is sales wasting a lot of time? And so we look for a lot of those smaller quick wins just so we can get some traction almost immediately to improve the database, to improve how people are doing their own jobs. And then beyond that, when we look at systems and we see that there's a lot of admins and everybody has elevated controls, those are concerning to us. And we generally address those relatively quickly because we want to make sure that everybody has the appropriate access to the various tools. We also look for duplicate tools. And so if two things are doing the same job, we'll ask the question, why? And maybe one team doesn't know the other team has said tool. So really elevating and shining a light on what all exists within an organization are things that we look for. And so those are immediate improvements that you can make. Long-term improvements are things like, do they have a scoring model? Are they just bringing a whole bunch of leads in and then tossing them over the proverbial fence to sales and asking sales to try and warm up really cold leads when marketing could help with some of that nurture and engagement and education at a very high level before they throw it to sales? Also, user journeys. Do we have enough content to bring people along the journey that we want them to go on? And so those are more long-term things that we then focus on. And again, we set these short, medium, long-term goals based off of the priorities of the business.
And I'm amazed at how often, again, you and I have talked to leaders, and they're very crystal clear on the outcomes they're after.
Yes.
But somehow becomes the Tower of Babel, and it gets lost in translation between what we're doing, who owns it, why are we doing it, when are we doing it, and then they're concerned or they're baffled about why they're not getting the results they're after. That lack of alignment, and again, that's where our agile alignment work comes from, of just constantly getting and keeping a finger on the pulse of the business. Here's the destination we're after. We may not know the path to get there, but we know what to test. We know what to get out. We've got the right data, capturing, measurement, analysis capability, a dashboard and a cadence to review that and come back. And it's never a switch, it's a dial. Mm-hmm. How do we dial up some efforts? How do we dial back others to continuously progress against those outcomes?
Well, and it's really great when we see leadership, just across the board, organizational leadership that doesn't approach any of these problems as an us and a them. It's a we. Because it's really hard to get sales and marketing aligned when they're not wanting to work in lockstep. So being open from leadership down to have those conversations, to be candid with each other, to maybe shadow each other. Maybe the demand gen or product marketing person needs to understand what it is customers are saying, have the mechanism available to them to let them sit in on sales calls. Or if you're recording your sales calls, make sure that it's shared back with your product marketing team, because those nuggets are really important. So it's a we. It's always a we. It's never an us and a them. And so related to that, and coaching your executives that you work with, Nour, like what sort of advice would you give to them to help them align their sales and marketing functions?
You brought up a great point. If you think of sales, marketing, customer success, product, their contributions, that if that's the revenue engine, as quickly as possible, getting everybody on that team to think, act, behave as a we versus us and them, or those guys, or that the sooner you're gonna get everybody, you are a part of the crew team. We're talked about big believers of rowing with the same velocity and veracity in the same direction, yep. Right? The sooner we get everybody on the same page as to this is a we challenge. And by the way, Jenn, I've also learned not to assume everybody's broken, right? There's also opportunities. Like this is a we opportunity that, if we got this piece right, if we minor tweak that, or again, I was with a team where the revenue executive wants more pipeline. And the marketing leader is saying, well, we've got stuff coming at the top. They're just not converting. So it's as much of a challenge of getting the right individuals engaged at top of the funnel, but also really improving and optimizing the conversion. So we get much better at moving them along, again, their buying journey with the way we sell, the way we recommend next steps, the way we behave like advisors and not transactional salespeople.
Well, and the way they also want to learn, like they're researching your solution, make sure that they have the capability to binge all your content and learn what they can without putting up roadblocks.
And again, when a customer, as I mentioned, a client that the customers and the channel partners were part of the internal meeting and raved about, here's how we found out about you. Here's both, all of them said we'd done a ton of due diligence before we ever spoke to somebody.
Yeah.
So they're reading your blog, they're downloading your position papers, they're talking to industry analysts, they're talking to their peers. Hey, what do you know about XYZ company? And they come to the table ready to engage you with a very definitive set of questions and challenges. And they're assessing how good of a fit are you? What are you willing? What are you capable of doing in areas where you may not be a viable fit? Hey, could you also do this? Or could you bring different parts of it? That co-creation is really exciting to watch. And that's what I look for with sales, marketing, customer success teams, both within the organization, with their channel partners, distributors, go-to-market partners, as well as their customers. How about you? Again, you look at processes, you look at capabilities, you look at tech stack. Where do you see great collaboration? How do you define great collaboration between those different stakeholders?
The best organizations that I've seen do this well, the sales leader, the marketing leader, and the customer success leader are kind of like three legs of a stool. They all know what's happening with each other. They all understand the challenges that they each have. They're willing to share, and they're also open to candid feedback. So like you mentioned, your client has a lot of stuff coming in the very top, but they're not converting well. Well, why aren't they converting well? Is it something that they could have help with? And could sales help? Are there nuggets that sales has that could then lead to product marketing creating more position papers or webinars or something that could help move them down the funnel? And so just being open with all of that information and being really candid is important. And having those leaders be in lockstep really allows an organization to move quickly. And when you have arrogance or an ego or someone who's wanting to take all the glory for themselves, it really just disrupts the flow that needs to be created in each one of those departments, and then also collectively together.
So for our audience, if you joined us late, you've been listening to the incomparable Jenn Cordz, who's our business partner and leads our RevOps practice. Jenn and her team, masterful at not only the technology, HubSpot, Marketo, Salesforce, 6 Sense, Gong. I made the mistake of asking her kind of, what have you touched? What have your team implemented? And she sends me back a Google sheet that I think I'm scrolling through like 6 months later. So a lot of great depth with Jenn and her team. I would encourage you to check out some of the work they're doing. We're also turning a lot of these conversations into blog posts. We're turning them into articles in our Nour forum community and the RevOps group there. So I would encourage you to check out Jenn and her team. The maturity model is on our website soon as a downloadable PDF. The accelerated time to close, likewise, again, big part of what we believe in, I'm working on. So thanks for joining us. Again, RevOps Live is every Tuesday, 11 o'clock Eastern. I may be on the road for the next couple of weeks, so Jenn's going to carry through our conversation on this topic. But we thank you for watching, consuming this wherever you consume podcasts and live streams, and hope you'll join us again Tuesdays, 11 o'clock Eastern for RevUp, where we focus on accelerating engagement into revenue. On behalf of our team, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Take care.